What?
Good morning, everybody. This is the House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. Today is Friday, April 11th, and it is 8:51 in the morning. We are here with our intern, Helen Hargraves. Good morning, Helen.
Morning, everyone. Happy Friday.
Good Friday.
Friday.
For the record, I'm Helen Argraves, the legislative intern for the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee this session and a senior at the University of Vermont. Today, I'm just going to give you an update on, well, mainly two things, but a slight update. I'll just kick it off with. The Senate was supposed to take a look at, do a read through of H34 this week. They didn't end up getting to it. So that's number 3. Number 2 is I have received the majority of the numbers for the data document for CTE centers around Vermont. So that, if you have the link still, if not, I can send it again, is getting closer to being a final document. And finally, Chair Marcotte asked me to look into non-compete laws specifically around franchises around the states. So with the time that I had this week, I found 2 states that explicitly reference franchises in their non-compete laws. It doesn't seem to be very common at this point, but Indiana and Minnesota. Indiana essentially bans non-compete clauses for franchises for a period longer than 3 years. So while it still allows franchises to organize non-compete agreements, it caps it. Minnesota actually completely bans it, as far as I can understand it. And in the report, I have language from each. So for example, in Minnesota, the law says all franchise contracts or agreements and any other device or practice of a franchisor shall conform to the following provisions. It shall be unfair and inequitable for any person to enforce any unreasonable covenant not to compete after the franchise relationship ceases to exist. So I'm gonna amend what I said before. It's not a complete ban, but the point of many of these statutes is to establish reasonable conditions for non-compete agreements. Particularly, if you go further down, 3 qualifications that need to be reasonable, including duration, geographic area, and scope of business activity. In the report, I have links for several states where that language is used. If you click on those, it goes straight to the statute. For example, Texas is, and you can click on North Dakota. There really is minimal. Minimal writing to reference as far as I'm aware, but I did also highlight California in this document because it stands out a little bit. And some key points that its non-compete law addresses are it requires individual notification of employees, including a deadline. So it says for current employees and for former employees who were employed after January 1st, 2022, whose contracts include a non-compete clause, or who were required to enter a non-compete agreement that does not satisfy an exception, the employer shall, by February 14th, 2024, notify the employee that the non-compete clause or non-compete agreement is void. The interesting part about the non-compete law in California is that it extends the reach of the law to beyond the state. So any contract that is void under this chapter is unenforceable regardless of where and when the contract was signed. So parties could sign the contract in another state, for example, Nevada. But if the employee or one party is living and working in California, then the California statute is applicable in that case. Features that I found were common across different state statutes there were a couple specific limitations on duration of non-compete agreements. It wasn't very common. They were just Indiana at 3 years and Louisiana at 2 years. In almost every single one, the exceptions to non-compete agreements include sale of the goodwill of a business and the dissolution of a partnership. Agreements tend to protect trade secrets as well. And another thing to note about the Indiana law is that it enforces damages if any franchisee who is a party to a franchise agreement entered into or renewed after July 1st, 1976 may bring an action to recover damages or reform the franchise agreement. And the Indiana law also establishes that no action can be brought after 2 years, 2 years after a violation. That is what I have on the current state of legislative activity around non-compete in franchises. There's a lot on non-compete for employees specifically, but very little language concerning franchises. And in terms of cases, I'm still working on finding those. They're definitely less accessible than the state statutes. So that I can have by next week. But yeah, that is what I have for you today. I'm happy to take any questions. If there's anything you'd like me to dig into particularly in terms of what I brought today or to look further into, I'm happy to do that.
Great. Questions for Helen? Questions for me? I don't know if folks know, we have non-compete, 205, H205 is agreements, non-compete. So we are going to be looking at that in the next couple of weeks or so. So Helen's giving us some good background information so that we're well prepared to work on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's any information, not so much on the franchise stuff, but in a situation where you have key people, like for example, you have a situation where someone was a director or a vice president or something like that, then they break off, because now you're talking about someone that's got a lot more inside information. If there's anything that distinguishes, say, a line worker versus a officer of the company.
Mm-hmm. Some statutes do have specific salary levels where a non-compete agreement can be enforced. I haven't seen anything specifically on a particular role, but for example, the dissolution of partnerships does speak to, a certain role within the company having an influence, but I can look more into that if you would like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm curious about whether or not any of these statutes apply to medical practices or medical providers that might have been or might be a part of a large network and then want to, leave that network and have their own independent.
I believe there is, yes. I haven't looked into it directly, but I think,
Yeah, if you could include that too, that would be great.
I noticed that, for example, Texas has a section very specifically to medical practitioners and there's certain restrictions like that. They can't be prevented from getting access to patient data if the person requests it. There's certain kind of things to practitioners, so.
On the CTE, you're finding that you're getting access to the information. Folks are, sometimes it's a little, like if you have to go into the whole catchment area, getting all of that information is time consuming. Is that what you're finding? Or you're finding that it's just hard to find the information?
it's mostly hard to communicate with so many different entities. Getting across the same message, it's not always going to be understood in the same way. So it's some of it is receiving half the data that I'm looking for, or data from a different year, things like that. So it's just sorting through and making sure everything is streamlined. Some people I do need to reach out to again. But other than that, it's been really smooth sailing. Everybody's very amenable, very helpful. Yeah.
And if anybody's watching, it's linked to our April 4th Friday morning under Helen's name. So that's where we can have easy access to that spreadsheet as it gets updated. Great, thank you. Other questions for Helen or comments? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Committee members, does anybody following their partner committee having anything to do with what's going on in our? Yeah.
I neglected to give the report last week on S27. That's the medical debt bill that I think's on the notice calendar today. So I just wanted to give a brief update that I connected with folks. It was voted on 11-0. I did check with the reporter and some other folks. There appears to be no opposition to it. I could say more, but that's about it. In terms of what they're working on right now, I know it's not directly related to, but we've heard so much about housing and healthcare as being an impact on businesses and workers. They're working on, I think, a fairly consequential bill around what's called reference-based pricing. Not entirely clear what the parameters would be, but I think it holds some promise for reducing, the rate of inflation in healthcare. That's what I saw.
I did check in with ag and food resiliency and they assured me they had nothing that intercepted with our ARC. So.
Yeah, I have, I've been following two committees, House, Human Services and Environment, and Human Services didn't have anything directly related except for Burlington about public inebriation. But, and then same thing with the environment. They've been doing a lot of stuff on fish and wildlife management, beavers, and also they're working on a bill for the septic sludge and biosolids. So they're doing some interesting work about contamination.
I'm not sure about judiciary. I don't see anything. As for the energy and digital, I've been helping them with they want to do a report on the sale of personal data by government. So
Judiciary does.
no, energy and digital.
different from the report that we had.
They started hearing revenue, how we depend on the revenue of the sale of personal data, so they want to know more about that.
Specifically DMV and other.
All of our department, like which departments are selling data and what data and to who, yeah.
Transportation is still working with DMV on their fee schedules and of their kind of regulatory cleanup.
Ways and Means has been working on a little education bill this week.
I hear the business community is a little concerned about that. For not great reason.
Yeah, about the separator.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we heard about it in the.
Yeah.
In the hearing yesterday, the business community is concerned that separating out businesses from non-homestead is going to cause business taxes on businesses to go up. And the goal is not to have the tax on businesses go up, but to be able to tax other areas more appropriately, but they're on that.
Anything else?
Can I take a minute and introduce Will, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting today, who's filling in for Anna Grace.
Morning, Will.
Thank you for being
Thanks for
here.
helping us. Yeah, do we come? Well, I think right now it'd be like an average right now.
Oh.
It's a regent.
It's a regent.
It's a different
Point, yeah.
It could be,
Can I add, I'm gonna add one bill that actually, this is environment, they weren't talking about it really this week, but they did last week, and I think judiciary was talking about it this week, which is it's called an act relating to protection from nuisance suits for agricultural activities. It's the right to farm
oh, yeah.
kind of idea, S45. And trying to, I think they're really just trying to get to the bottom of like, is it an issue exactly? You know, there's like one lawsuit, right? That like sort of prompted this. And
Yeah.
so it's been interesting. I talked to a couple people on both of those committees, and really it sounds like they're having interesting conversations, trying to really, but what I felt like was relevant to some of the stuff we talk about is like really trying to understand, like there's fear of lawsuits, but what is reality in terms of lawsuits? Because you can't completely legislate away lawsuits, right? Like people can still make.
You have a right to.
Right, exactly. So that's like, there were a lot of, and they were, something that came up was that at the meeting or the specialty foods tasting yesterday, the Sisters of Anarchy owner had a little bit of a lobbying thing saying, please pass the right to farm law. And so had conversations with her and trying to understand why she supports it. And a lot of it had to do with sort of fear of lawsuits, and that she had a conflict with a neighbor who was unhappy about cow drainage or something like that and had to hire a lawyer, and there was no lawsuit, but would this, the question is sort of like, would this law even change that? Right? So it was interesting thinking about and sort of how that applies to business practices in general, and how do you set up policy so that to try to limit nuisance lawsuits, but it's not like you can legislate them away.
I would add on that one that farming being done in different parts of the state has different challenges.
Yeah.
And that I think has been highlighted a lot in this
Yeah.
bill.
I think that's right. Like where she is, she's in Shelburne, which is being encroached by suburban development. But then I think what generated the law had to do with what was happening in big farms in Addison County, right? So it's been very different, very different dynamics.
Anything else? Okay. So we're on the floor at 9:30. I think the only thing we've got scheduled today is S117.
gonna depend on when we're off the floor. You know, if it's real close to lunchtime, I think we'll figure 1 o'clock. Only have a couple of people testifying, Maggie Lenz for retail grocers, and then Sophie will run us through a new draft. I asked her to include language that we talked about last week of self-reporting through workers' comp insurers when they have an issue and file late, or give somebody send their paychecks late. So they get a better idea of what's going on. I also heard that there may be a walk back from Department of Labor concerning piece on the Warren Act in there. That dropping from 50 to 20, I think there's been some pushback from AGC and others. So I think we won't hear about that today. That'll be something we'll hear about next Friday. I think the plan next Friday afternoon will be to understand what that is, make adjustments if we have to, and then pass it still out. So. Also understand on the VITA bill, that the Commissioner of Forests and Parks has asked that, on the BGAT piece of it, that we also add logging into that. It's kind of implied when we talk
Yeah,
about
that's
that,
nice.
but
Yeah.
they wanted.
Special.
Yeah, so, and that's fine. We want to make sure that all
Yeah.
businesses, and if they feel more comfortable with that,
Yeah.
so they'll probably, I heard that's the only change that they'll probably make. So when it comes back here, we'll just concur and get it done and sent to the governor, so that one we got.
Great.
So we're still gotta put together the agenda for next week, but we're gonna.
Question for you about the logging, is that in the, like, the actual description of what VITA has oversight for, or is it specifically for the storm or disaster relief?
This is a disaster.
The disaster, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
And they already have,
Right.
the ag is a broad description of what's under that, so
Yeah.
they already can provide bonds to
Yeah.
logging.
Thanks.
Okay.